Why does the mind seem slower, even when the body still wants to move forward? That is a question millions of people carry in silence. Not because they don't want an answer, but because formulating it out loud means admitting something they're not yet ready to admit. It means transforming an internal restlessness into a reality that might require a conversation nobody knows how to start. The body still has energy to walk, to travel, to talk, to create, to live with the fullness that always defined this person. The plans still exist. The desire still exists, but the mind seems distant, slower, confused in a way that is difficult to describe with precision. Not a dense, obvious confusion, but a subtle fog that settles between you and your own thoughts, as if everything that used to be immediate now requires an extra second to process, as if the mental spontaneity that was automatic has started to require effort. And the real pain doesn't always begin with forgetting. That's the most common misconception when people describe cognitive decline, that it starts with memory failing dramatically. But the actual experience, for most people, is far more subtle and far more insidious than that. It begins with brain fog, with difficulty finding simple words in the middle of a sentence, words you've used thousands of times, that have been part of your vocabulary forever, and that suddenly simply don't appear when you need them. With the feeling of being physically present in a conversation but mentally absent of hearing what is being said but not processing it with the speed and depth you had before. With a loss of clarity that gradually robs not just specific memories but something much broader. Confidence, spontaneity, the lightness of simply existing without having to constantly monitor your own mental functioning. That loss is what truly weighs, and it is far more common than statistics can capture. Many people believe this is simply aging, that losing memory and focus is inevitable, that after a certain age the mind only gets worse, and that the only sensible thing to do is accept this reality with grace and adapt to growing limitations. But that belief, however widespread, is fundamentally wrong, not completely wrong. Aging does produce changes in the brain. No biological system remains unchanged across decades, but deeply wrong in the most important respect, inevitability, because the brain is not a machine that simply wears down. With use and time, it is a living system that continuously responds to the conditions you create for it, and the conditions most people create for their brain across adult life especially. In the decades that mark the transition into middle age and beyond are, in many cases, systematically inadequate for optimal cognitive functioning. The brain continues obeying biological rules at every stage of life, rules that don't negotiate with age, that don't make exceptions for good intentions, that don't bend to the cultural narrative that decline is inevitable. It depends on deep sleep, not just hours in bed, but complete sleep cycles that include the recovery phases where the most critical neural maintenance processes happen. It depends on adequate circulation that ensures sufficient oxygen and nutrient supply to an organ that consumes 20% of the body's total energy despite representing less than 2% of its weight. It depends on regular physical movement that stimulates the production of neurotrophic factors and reduces the systemic inflammation that progressively compromises neural function. It depends on genuine mental stimulation that keeps the brain in the state of plasticity that protects it against decline. And it depends, in an absolutely fundamental way, on specific nutrients to manufacture the chemical messengers that sustain memory, learning, attention, and the processing speed that distinguishes a clear mind from a slow one. Among those nutrients, one stands out for a specific reason: choline. You may never have heard as much about choline as you hear about vitamin C, omega-3, or vitamin D. It doesn't carry the same cultural status as other widely known nutrients. It doesn't feature prominently in public health campaigns. It isn't the star ingredient in the best-selling supplements on store shelves, but in the specific context of cognitive health, it may be the most important nutrient most people are ignoring. And here is why. Choline is the direct precursor of acetylcholine, one of the most critical neurotransmitters for human cognitive function. Acetylcholine isn't just one neurotransmitter among many. It is the neurotransmitter most directly associated with memory and learning. It is released in hippocampal circuits during the formation of new memories. It regulates attention and the ability to maintain sustained focus. It participates in the mental processing that differentiates fast, clear thinking from slow, foggy thinking. And it is the neurotransmitter that certain neurodegenerative conditions compromise earliest and most severely, which is not coincidence, but rather evidence of how central acetylcholine is to human cognitive architecture. The problem is that acetylcholine production depends directly on the availability of choline in the body. The brain cannot manufacture acetylcholine from nothing. It needs choline as raw material. And when that raw material is lacking, when the diet doesn't consistently provide enough, acetylcholine production is compromised. And when acetylcholine production is compromised, the signals appear. Frequent distraction without obvious explanation, difficulty concentrating on tasks that used to be automatic, memory lapses that seem random but have a frequency that doesn't match just tiredness, slower thinking, mild confusion, forgetting why you walked into a room, losing the thread of reasoning mid-sentence. These aren't signs of inevitable aging. In many cases, they are signs of specific nutritional deficiency, and nutritional deficiencies can be corrected. It was exactly from the understanding of choline's role in acetylcholine production that researchers identified simple, accessible food sources that can directly support this function. You'll find it at the first link in the description. That's when a simple discovery began, drawing attention from those seeking to nourish the brain naturally, not with expensive supplements, not with complex protocols, not with interventions demanding radical lifestyle transformation. A small seed, ignored by many, present in foods that millions of people consume regularly without any idea of what they're getting or what they're missing when they don't include it. Sesame seeds. And before natural skepticism appears, because any claim about a simple food like this deserves skepticism before acceptance, let me explain why this specific seed deserves genuine attention in the context of brain health. This isn't natural product marketing. These aren't claims without foundation. These are documented mechanisms of action that align directly with the causes of cognitive decline we're discussing. The first relevant compound is choline and its precursors. Sesame seeds contain choline in amounts that, within a consistent and varied diet, make a real contribution to the body's levels of this nutrient. Not in pharmacological doses, but as part of a nutritional strategy that provides the brain with raw material for acetylcholine production in a continuous and sustained way. And the food form of choline coming from whole foods like sesame tends to be processed by the body differently from isolated supplements. The food matrix in which it is embedded influences its absorption, its metabolism, and potentially its availability to brain tissue. The second critical compound is healthy fats, especially unsaturated fatty acids. Sesame is rich in linoleic acid and oleic acid monounsaturated fatty acids that are structural components of neural membranes, and here's the connection that matters. The fluidity of neural membranes, that physical property that determines how efficiently protein receptors function, how quickly electrical signals propagate, how well synaptic vesicles release their neurotransmitters depends directly on the fatty acid composition of those membranes. When the diet is chronically poor in quality unsaturated fats, neural membranes become progressively more rigid, less fluid, less efficient. And that rigidity translates into exactly the type of cognitive slowness we're describing, not as metaphor, but as direct biophysical consequence. Sesame provides these fatty acids in the form of whole food, with the bioavailability and cofactor matrix that whole foods offer. The third compound is sesamin and sesamoline. These two lignans, bioactive compounds unique to sesame, have been attracting growing scientific interest for their specific antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Sesamin has demonstrated in studies the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, something most anti-inflammatory compounds cannot do, and exert direct protective effects on neural tissue. It modulates specific inflammatory pathways in the central nervous system and has shown neuroprotective effects in models of oxidative stress. Sesamoline has antioxidant properties that complement sesamin's effects, contributing to the neutralization of free radicals in brain tissue. The fourth element is the combination of calcium and magnesium. Sesame is one of the most concentrated dietary sources of calcium available, especially unhulled sesame, where calcium content is particularly high. But what is frequently neglected in this discussion is that sesame also provides magnesium in significant amounts. And the combination of calcium and magnesium matters specifically for neural function because both participate in the regulation of activity. Calcium is the second messenger that triggers neurotransmitter release at synapses. Magnesium regulates NMDA receptors, critical structures for synaptic plasticity and memory consolidation. The balance between these two minerals directly influences the efficiency of synaptic transmission and, consequently, the speed and quality of cognitive processing. The fifth compound is vitamin B1, thiamine, and other B-complex components. B-complex vitamins are essential for neuronal energy, metabolism for the ability of neurons to produce sufficient energy to sustain their function, and sesame provides thiamine in amounts that make a real contribution to daily intake of this nutrient. Thiamine deficiency, specifically, is associated with impaired cognitive function and memory, and is more common than generally recognized in populations consuming nutrient-poor diets or with conditions that compromise B vitamin absorption. If you want to start this process today, what researchers have isolated about how to incorporate sesame strategically into the daily routine is available at the first link in the description. As simple as it always should have been. But there is another dimension of this story that needs to be told honestly. The dimension that rarely appears in discussions about brain health because it isn't clinical, isn't biochemical, isn't measurable in tests. It's emotional. And for those living cognitive decline, even subtle, even in the early stages where everything still seems explainable, this emotional dimension can be the heaviest of all. Difficulty focusing isn't just cognitive inconvenience. It erodes self-confidence in ways that accumulate silently. You pick something up to read and have to go back several lines because what you just read didn't register. You start a task with clear intention and forget it midway, not because you were interrupted, but because the thread simply vanished. You walk into a room without remembering why, and stand there for a moment, trying to reconstruct the thought you were having seconds before. Someone speaks to you and you're physically present, but your mind seems slow to keep up. You hear the words, but the processing, the connection between what was said and what you know and what you want to respond, arrives with a delay that didn't exist before. And each of these moments, individually, seems insignificant. But added up across weeks and months, they build an internal narrative that keeps getting heavier. Am I getting worse? Am I losing my capacity? Am I becoming a burden to the people around me without realizing it? These questions aren't paranoia. They are the natural response of an intelligent, self-aware person to a pattern of functioning that is changed, and that they feel even without being able to name exactly what changed. And then there is the social impact, telling the same story without realizing it, repeating a question that was already answered, confusing details of recent events, noticing those discreet glances that people exchange, that flash of mutual recognition you weren't supposed to see, feeling the wave of embarrassment that follows, silent and complete. This isn't weakness. This isn't a final verdict. This isn't evidence that something is irreparably wrong. In many cases, perhaps most cases where these signs appear without other clinical markers, it is simply a brain operating with insufficient resources, asking the only way it can for the support it isn't receiving. And when that support is provided consistently with the right nutrients, combined with the other pillars of brain care, the system responds in ways that surprise people with their specificity. Not a dramatic overnight transformation, a progressive rebuilding that begins appearing in details. The constant mental sluggishness starts having intervals of clarity. The intervals of clarity become more frequent than the foggy ones. The word that wouldn't come starts coming faster. The task that required too much effort starts flowing more naturally. The confidence to participate in conversations without background anxiety starts returning. Neuroplasticity is the scientific concept that underpins this possibility and that still hasn't reached clearly enough the conversations people have about aging. The idea that the adult brain is fixed, that after a certain age, neural connections can only decrease, never increase, has been completely overturned by the scientific evidence accumulated over the last 3 decades. We know today that the adult brain can create new synapses in response to learning, can reorganize neural roots to work around compromised areas, can, in response to adequate stimulation and favorable conditions, grow in regions that were in decline, including the hippocampus, the most critical region for forming new memories. This isn't motivational theory. It's observable in neuroimaging studies across populations of all ages. And what this discovery means in practice is that the conditions you create for your brain today have real capacity to influence where it will be 5, 10, 15 years from now. The choline you provide today is the acetylcholine that sustains memory and focus tomorrow. The quality sleep you prioritize today is the memory consolidation and lymphatic cleaning that happens tonight. The physical movement you incorporate today is the BDNF that stimulates new neural connections across the coming weeks. Every choice is a signal sent to the system, and the system, given the right set of signals with the right consistency, responds. How to incorporate sesame in a practical and consistent way? The simplest approach: a tablespoon of sesame seeds sprinkled on salads, fruits, yogurt, soups, or vegetables. Tahini paste, which is ground sesame, can be used in moderation as a substitute for other condiments, or as a vegetable accompaniment. Sesame can also be lightly toasted and added to warm dishes where its flavor pleasantly intensifies. Unwhole sesame preserves more nutrients, including most of the calcium and bioactive lignans. Whole sesame has slightly better mineral absorption. Both forms have real value. The choice can be based on taste and texture preference. Consistency matters infinitely more than quantity on any specific day. A tablespoon every day for a month produces more perceptible results than 3 tablespoons on a single day followed by a week without consumption. And sesame works better as all foods work better within a broader dietary context that supports brain health, combined with other foods rich in healthy fats, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory compounds. Its effects are amplified by nutritional synergy, because no single food saves the mind, but several correct habits, summed, maintained, practiced, with intention and consistency, can transform it in ways that people frequently describe as recovering something they thought was lost. Forgetting doesn't have to be a verdict. Mental fog doesn't have to be a destiny. Losing focus doesn't have to mean the end. There is a real, accessible, evidence-based path, not in miraculous promises, not in solutions that contradict biology, but in a genuine understanding of what the brain needs to function at its best level, and in consistent choices that provide exactly that. Sesame is one piece of that path, a small, inexpensive, easily incorporable piece, but with mechanisms of action that align directly with the causes of the cognitive decline most people are experiencing. When combined with quality sleep, regular physical movement, active cognitive stimulation, stress management, and a broad diet that reduces inflammation and provides the nutrients the nervous system needs, it contributes to creating the environment in which the brain can do what it was always capable of doing: recover, strengthen connections, produce the chemical messengers that sustain clarity, memory, and focus, respond. The complete method is in the pinned comment. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. In the upcoming videos, I'll keep showing you natural, accessible, evidence-based strategies to strengthen memory, recover attention, and protect the brain at any age. Because the mind that seems slower today is not necessarily the mind of tomorrow. It is responding to the environment that was created for it. And when that environment changes, when the right nutrients arrive, when sleep receives the priority it deserves, when movement and stimulation and care add up into a consistent routine, the response begins. Not as a miracle, as biology, as a living system that, when it receives what it needs, does exactly what it was designed to do.